Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. We are so glad to have you back for another new installment in Donor Search's 2019 Flash Class Series. I was just speaking with our presenter saying we're all here in the Donor Search office feeling particularly perky and upbeat today. We've been getting so much rain and snow and ice, and we finally have some gorgeous sunshine streaming through our windows, so I certainly hope everyone is having just as beautiful as an afternoon. And if that's not the case, we are certainly sending some sunshine your way. Once again, I'm so happy everyone can join us. I'm Hannah Krobach, and I'm here for Donor Search, filling in for Jay Frost as he travels today, and I will be moderating today's class. I just want to start by reviewing some basic housekeeping info. The first thing we'll address is the presenter slides from today. You will be able to receive both the slides and the recording, and they will be made available to you within the next day or so for your reference. Within that time frame, if you want to go back, listen to today's session, circle back on some of the ideas and topics that we'll chat about, you can do so by heading over to donorsearch.net and clicking on the Resources tab up at the top there. This will show a drop-down menu, and you'll click on Flash Class Library. And once you do that, you'll be able to see all of our previously recorded sessions. You'll be able to search by keyword or speaker, and that's a really great resource to use. Moving on, we'll talk about questions, and while your mics are muted to prevent any ambient background noise, barking dogs, EPS deliveries, we still want you to engage and interact with us by asking questions, and you can do that at any point in the presentation by clicking the questions box located right there in your GoToWebinar control panel. The speaker today is going to be stopping and taking questions throughout, so they definitely want to be hearing from you throughout the process of their presentation, so go ahead and feel free at any time to utilize that tool. Now getting to today's good stuff, which is the Flash class, and while you all are here, we're going to be talking about using change management to ensure success in your technology initiative. And our speaker today works right in the heart of this topic and will undoubtedly bring some incredibly helpful and actionable insight. And with that, I'd like to welcome Raleigh Zikatanova to the Flash class stage. Raleigh works at Heller Consulting and operates with over 10 years of experience in nonprofits. Before Heller, she wore many hats managing volunteers, development and fundraising, strategic planning, Salesforce systems, and much more. And this diverse combination of experience gives Raleigh in-depth insights for her role, and her understanding of how the challenges nonprofits face interlace through individual departments, and allows her to define solutions that improve efficiency and make an impact on an organization's mission and their goals. In addition to being a Salesforce certified administrator and a certified change practitioner, she holds a dual Bachelor of Arts degree in international politics and French and Francophone studies from Pennsylvania State University. So if we have any fellow Nittany Lions in the audience, be sure to make your presence known. I'm sure she would love to hear from you. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and give the stage over to Raleigh. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Riley, as Hannah mentioned. I'm very excited to be here, although I don't have the same pleasure of having a sunny day. I'm speaking to you all from the San Francisco Bay Area, and we are getting quite a bit of rain for the first time in a long time. So good and bad, but that doesn't dampen at all my excitement to be with you all today. And if there are, in fact, any Nittany Lions out there, I would love to know who you are. Living on the West Coast, I have just a much smaller pool that I get to talk to these days. And I don't see, paw stickers on cars as much as I would if I was back home in Pennsylvania. Just a little bit about myself. My career's been in the nonprofit sector, even ever since I was at Penn State. I worked in the development and philanthropy department there, and that moved on through my career. I've been working the last 5 years with Heller Consulting and been focused on strategic planning and technology implementations for all kinds of platforms and ecosystems to create that 360 view of constituents, part of which is fundraising and philanthropy advancement. Early on in my career, I realized that you can roll out whatever tool and system you want, but if no one is on board, generally it gets either partially adopted or sadly it can be outright abandoned and rejected. And I realized that so much of that has to do, with user adoption. And so I started to pursue that, and I'm looking forward to telling you all a bit more about that today. Before I jump into our goals for the day and start to talk more about change management, I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about Heller Consulting. Heller Consulting has been partnering with nonprofit organizations for the last over 20 years to provide guidance and insight to technology strategy, system implementations, and organizational change management strategy. Our services span vision planning for CRMs and ecosystems, building out tools and launching them, as well as integrated and standalone learning and development planning, user adoption plans, and training plans. Those are just a couple of the specific things that we work on, but we really dive in and partner with orgs to help further their missions and visions by using the tools available. And a lot of that has to do with getting people on board. I want to start before I go into, our agenda for the day and our goals. I want to tell you guys a story. So a lot of you have probably maybe seen or heard or participated in or led some kind of technology implementation. But the story I'm going to tell you doesn't have to do with fundraising. And I'm hoping that it'll be a perspective that will stick with you like it stuck with me. We have a colleague of mine told me this story. So she lives in Canada, and she heard about this mining town. So there was there are a bunch of miners. They work for a mining company in Canada, and these miners. Their company decided, oh my gosh, we have this access to this great new technology. We're going to be able to finally get into the 21st century and get all of our staff and employees direct deposit. So we're going to be able to give them their paycheck. They're not going to have to spend another hour of their life driving in on a day of the week that they might not even have a shift to pick up their paycheck. So project is underway. Leadership is super excited that they're going to be able to be a part of the 21st century, that they're going to be able to make the miners' staff lives a little bit easier. And the day comes and they announce that it's happening and they roll it out on a payroll day. And they get to work to roll it out, and everyone is up in arms. All the miners are incredibly upset, and the folks leading the initiative had no idea why. And it turns out that the miners really enjoyed being given a check that they would then take to their bank and cash. They would take their $10, $20 and put it in their back pocket and take the rest of their pay home to their wives, who, for the most part, their wives were the ones kind of controlling the household expenses and figuring that stuff out. And the most critical part of what they got from their paycheck was being able to use that little bit, have that freedom that they wanted to put that little bit away for themselves and go to the bar after work. So why am I telling you this story? So it turns out that if they had just listened, if they had just asked the folks running the initiative, if they had said, do you all see value in having a direct deposit check go straight into your bank account, and listen back, they would have been able to adapt the way that they set up the direct technology system to accommodate what the miners saw as most valuable in their day-to-day lives. So it wasn't so much that they minded driving to work on a day they don't have a shift. It was more the little bit that they could set aside for themselves, and not have to be accountable for, I guess. So that story sticks with me. I think it's pretty impactful because, I don't roll out direct deposit systems. I focus on fundraising and programs, technology, and CRM ecosystems. But the critical piece here is listening, and really actively figuring out what your team needs. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that today. I want to cover the purpose of change management. These buzzwords, some of you may or may not be familiar with them. Understand what your role in change is, you as an individual, and then understand what resistance is, why it happens, when it happens, and then I do want to share a couple of tools and resources that you can take away to manage resistance right away. So those are the things that we will be covering today. Before I jump in, I do want to do a quick poll. So if you guys can just respond in the chat with, A, B, C, D, E as your answer here. But I just want to get a feel for everyone that's on the line and understand what you all think change management is, what your organization sees it as. So maybe not you as an individual, but at your organization, how do you all, when someone says change management, what is it that they're talking about? Give everyone a minute or two, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. And Hannah, can folks write into the chat? Do we have that enabled?
They absolutely can, and we are getting some comments along with the answers as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great. All right. And did anyone have? Okay. Great. All right. Thank you. That is just helpful framing for me to have. So I'll dive in. Here, I want to talk about some basic truths about change. So when we're talking about change management, first we want to start from a foundation of what it is that at least I am defining change as. So change is at its most basic just a disruption. It's a disruption to expectations, to the status quo. Now, normally disruption, this word, and change sometimes in the context of projects can get a bad rap or have a bad connotation, but it's actually disruption in the sense of something is different. So it's not good or bad. It can be neutral, but it is different from the current state of what we are expecting. So depending on the change, so how big it is or how much impact it's going to have, that combined with our comfort with what is currently happening, what our current state is, that really affects how we react to a change. So either you'll be really, really, really resistant, or you might be neutral, or you might welcome it, depending on how you feel about how things are today and depending on how big that change is. So it's just a disruption. That's the first thing, not good or bad. The other piece of change is that in today's world, change is happening around us all of the time. It's the new normal in a digital world. So we've had agricultural revolutions, we've had the industrial ages and industrial revolution. These eras change the way that we work and the way that we think. And right now we're in a digital era. It changes the way that we interact with each other, the way we interact with our constituents, the way that we communicate. And with the Industrial Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution, those eras, things were slow. The difference here is the speed and the velocity of change. We are going to, it's not going to take us 100 years to go leaps and bounds. It might take us 1 or 2 or 5 at the most. So we're moving a lot faster. Changes all around us, and it's impacting the way that we interact with each other. And we are, as people, coming to expect that. So that's an important piece of that. Change also is what enables transformation to happen at our organizations. So how you're going to grow, adapt, scale, or pivot. Organizations, and I think the nonprofit sector, we know we need to grow and adapt and change in order to continue to evolve and survive and continue to grow and work toward our mission and visions. And then the final thing is that organizations undergo change, and people, individuals, as they absorb and adapt to change, they transition. So they undergo a transition, and a change can be a catalyst to that. So for today, we're actually going to be focusing on the individual. It's the basis of how, your role in change is how you absorb and adapt and transition from what is currently happening to what that vision is at the end. A simple definition, and this is a ProSci's definition, is change management is the process, the tools, and the techniques to manage the people side of change, to achieve whatever the required business results are. So this means that you've got your eye, right, set on a strategic goal driven by your organizational vision. And we all know that there are people involved. You've got your stakeholders, internal and external, and we need to be able to have tools, tactics, and strategies related to helping individuals move from right now to where we want to go as an organization to achieve those results. This is the formal definition of change management that I'll be referencing. One thing I want to point out is, as Hannah mentioned, I am a ProSci certified change practitioner, and just like with any other school of thought, there are many different approaches and methodologies to change management. It's a school of thought. There's a lot, and I really wanted to make sure that today we were able to discuss one component of that, and I could give you some key takeaways. So we won't be discussing all the different approaches and methodologies, but this is really what we've seen work at Heller and what we think is really impactful that you can take away and use. There's a lot more you can do if you want to dive deeper. So in the context of business results and how we use change management at our organizations, we undertake projects. It's the simplest way to think about it. So a technology project is going to have a start and an end date, and there's going to be business results usually associated with launching a new system and getting things underway and getting people to adopt the system. So if project management is building the system, launching it, we can equate that to, we've got a project to build a boat. So project management is going to be, I need 7 people to help build this size boat that we're supposed to be building, and I'm going to need this much wood and this much canvas for the sails, and I'm going to need to eventually hire people to row. But the change management component is not the scope or the budget or the timeline of project management. It's not what resources we need. It's how do I get people onto the boat to row the boat and get it to that next island over. So it's really about how to utilize the technology, the systems, the boat. One of the things that's really critical here is who owns change management. And it doesn't fall on one particular person. Everybody is involved across the organization. You can see executives in leadership, they're your sponsors. You've got those folks who are absolutely critical. ProSci has done research over the last 10 years, and consistently best practice in change management from that research is showing that one of the top, it's either number 1 or number 2 over the last 10 years. The critical success factor of a project is due to visible and active sponsorship from leadership. So they're a critical component. You've also got your project managers or your change management resource and team, and they're the ones that are really going to be taking change management on and being responsible for executing the change and providing that structured approach and that framework. So they're a critical component to change and transitioning individuals from what is currently going on to the end state and using systems. You've also got employees, just in general, your staff, your stakeholders, and I would even add here external stakeholders as another gear. These are the people who are impacted most directly. If they're participating, that means we're managing change the way that we wanted to at the onset. Or there might be active resistance and there's avoidance, and that's just as important for managing change. More critically, they're the subject matter experts. They're on the ground day to day, and so they're a critical component. And then finally, you've got supervisors or people who are managing people and managing other programs and projects. These are generally the folks who are, a silent majority. They can have the most influence about how a change goes, but they have so much ownership, and they're looking out for their staff and their employees and the people that they manage, that oftentimes they are that silent component. But we don't want to forget about them because they're really critical. And ProSci, again, has done quite a bit of research, and one of the places where supervisors are very, very important are when it comes to who is sending out messages about changes that are going on at the organization. So one of the things, if this is you or if you work at an org where you guys are undergoing change, what we see consistently is that staff, employees prefer to receive messages regarding organizational vision, the business overall, from leadership, executive managers, a CEO or a president, an executive director. What we're seeing, though, when it comes to how is this going to impact me, how will this new technology change my day-to-day, we're seeing that people really, really want to hear from their supervisors, from their managers. And so even though oftentimes supervisors and managers are this silent group that isn't speaking up maybe actively all the time, and maybe isn't attending every project meeting, right, because they've got a lot going on, we really do need to keep them apprised and looped in projects. So you can see here, again, really critical when thinking about undertaking any large initiative, and talking about messages. One of the reasons behind why research shows this is because, again, an individual is going through and being impacted by an external change, and they are then going to transition, and they need a little bit of support, usually from their manager or their supervisor, to understand what it is that is going to change for them in particular. What's in it for me? What is the impact? What will I have to do, right, in my day-to-day? Everyone experiences this change differently, and that transition is going to look different for everyone. A team or a group that is a part of a technology initiative or is impacted by it, they may, this transition may happen and not be complete, right? They may not have a new mindset or be 100% adopting technology at the very launch of a project. It might take them a little bit longer to get through to the end, and we'll actually circle back to that as we go through and talk a little bit more about this today. So if everyone can just take another minute and respond here in the chat again with A, B, or C. I want you to think of a change you are facing in your work, professional, and think about you as an individual in that change as well. So this first question, first of two questions, what phase is the change you're thinking about in right now? You're thinking it's at the start, you know things need to happen, we need to change. So start of a project potentially. You might be in the messy middle, you're in it, it's happening. Or you are living in the new world after the change took place. Take a minute and answer that. All right. Thank you all for taking the time to do that. And Hannah, do you see some of the replies? Are you seeing any trends or anything like that?
It seems like a lot of people are living right there in the messy middle. We have so many answers that have the capital B next to them. You guys are right in the middle of it, it seems.
So yeah, a lot is probably going on, and you are living it day to day. Thanks, Hannah. All right, so now keep that change in mind. And then I want you to also think about how big this project or this change is. So you're in the messy middle for the most part. Is it minor? It's relatively small, limited scope, or maybe very fast, right? It's not going to last very long. Is it medium when we think about a project? It might be a single department or team or just a single system, right? It's not impacting a large volume of employees or stakeholders. Or is it really big? It's major. It's an overhaul. It's an organizational transformation type of change. Everyone could take a minute and answer that as well. All right, I'm seeing a lot of people on the major side of things. Transformational. Okay, great. Thank you all for taking the time to think about that and answer. So think of yourself now as part of this really big change. Your reaction to this change, you as an individual, right? So moving outside of thinking about it as a project, you as an individual, usually as part of a major change, are probably going to be thinking about 100 different things every day, especially because many of you are in the messy middle. And I want you to think about where you fall in these. I'm going to put up 3 categories in just a second. So I'm going to put them up, and I want you to think about how you reacted to the change that you've been thinking about, or where you fall, on this. Are you steady and consistent? So the change came up, or it's coming up, and you're thinking, pretty risky, I don't know, changes might be warranted, but I need to see some evidence, and I'm going to need to think through it and process. Are you in the middle? You're neutral, risk neutral, right? So you're thinking, that could be neat. I'll roll along, kind of go with the flow. Or are you a change adventurer? Are you thinking, yes, change is amazing. I love it. Sign me up. I want to see what it looks like. Let's dive in and see what's going on, and then we can look at it from in there. And I'm seeing some change adventures, some steady and consistent. Go ahead and put what you're thinking in the question section there. And just a quick hint, there is no right or wrong. So I myself actually am steady and consistent. I like to know a lot of information up front as much as possible, and then I like to step back and process it. So there is no right or wrong. And the likelihood is that you're working with a lot of folks at your organization that fall all along, from steady, consistent to change adventure. Yeah. All right. We've got quite a lot of change adventurers. That's exciting. And then some steady, consistent also. Yeah. So again, no right or wrong. Every role is absolutely necessary and valuable to any initiative that you undertake. And the other thing is, I asked you all to think about the project that, we answered the other questions about. But if you think about some other project, it can be a personal or professional project, right? Maybe you're redoing the countertops in your kitchen, or maybe you all are about to roll out a new newsletter sequence and communication journey to your constituents. You might fall on a different part. You might have a different mentality toward different changes depending on the size and scope of the change. So it's not static. It's not fixed. It's dynamic. This is a tool you can use for yourself. I use it all the time for myself. And the thing here is that, again, each change initiative, every role is essential. So if you could think about your project team that you got, and you might be able to determine where people fall, right? Or you might just be thinking about yourself. But your steady consistents, what value do they bring? So they're the people that are going to be able to identify every risk that might come up throughout the course of a project. Let's use that. That is incredibly essential and valuable. How can we be proactive about identifying risks and then plan for them, right? That's what your steady consistents will be able to do. They're also the ones that'll probably want to be documenting everything that's going on. So they're really good. That is one way that we can leverage folks who fall on that end. And then you've got folks there who might want to be beta testers, brand new processes, so they can get in on the ground floor and have the time to process everything before it kind of rolls out to everyone else. So that's where value might be for team members that fall into steady consistent. You might be in risk neutral. These are the folks that can really look at things objectively, and they can look at cost benefit and not have anything be, influenced by subjective reaction. They're neutral, so they might be really good at that. They might also be the ones where you can present them all the facts and say, do you see this as go or no go, right? Because again, they're so neutral and they've got that ability to be really, really objective about it. And then they might be the other ones that can kind of be that steady piece for others, for other stakeholders. So they can provide information, be the influencers that you might want to use as champions and as communicators with other stakeholders. And the last one, your change adventurers. They're the ones that are going to be able to articulate and be really passionate potentially. So they might be the ones that are your vision statement creators. They're able to articulate what it is, not necessarily day to day that's going to get us from point A to point B, but why we're envisioning the end state the way it is. What is it that's driving us there that we want to get there to? They might also be your chief communicator, right? And then they might be the ones leading the charge. Or being really true champions and getting people on board and keeping everything moving. So there is absolute value in everyone across the board. And again, different from project to project and different for yourself. So I just encourage you to think about this as you dive into new projects, or maybe you're in the messy middle. Think about who you are for this project and where you fall, and then what roles your team members might have, and consider plugging them in to some of the tasks and activities that you've got on your project where they bring value, so that we are moving the change initiative forward together. Okay. Ultimately, if we employ change management tactics and make sure that everyone is aware of how they are participating and the value that they bring into change initiatives, what that has shown consistently over time in research, again, through ProSci, that they have done is, no matter what, with any large initiative, and this one is an implementation, a technology implementation, the line on the bottom, which is teal or blue, if you can see colors, that one is, there's a dip. It's a productivity dip. And that happens, people are getting used to things. You might not be pulling your reports as fast as you were before when you knew and were used to the system you had, right? So you have a new system. So it's productivity dip, and it's anticipated. But what happens with change management incorporated into every part of your project and initiative is that dip is significantly higher on this chart, so the green. So we see less of an impact. And this not only, this impact is, what people, the quality of what staff is producing, the time it takes to produce what they are producing, and also cumulatively what folks are feeling over time. You can see this dip is shorter, so it is not as long, which reduces burnout over time, because this can be quite long if it is not managed proactively. And ultimately, this difference in here results in budget and resources, right? Man hours, staff power going to this. And so that is greatly reduced. So there is a real return on proactively incorporating change management techniques early on in projects in order to increase productivity and ensure that you are reducing burnout and not using time and resources in a way that is unproductive later on. Right. Now, many of you are in the messy middle, so some of you may be experiencing some of this. No matter how much we try and think about where folks might have resistance, there will always be resistance. So I want to point out a couple of things before going further and sharing a couple of tools with you that you can use to manage resistance. Just like with change getting sometimes a bad rap, or the word disruption getting a bad rap and a negative connotation, resistance can get a really negative connotation. But if we think about it, resistance is going to be expected, right? So we talked, I mentioned a little bit earlier that there are, depending on the size and scope of your project and how you normally as an individual react to change, right? You might be steady, neutral, or an adventurer, whatever your kind of your inclination is. Resistance is going to happen, and it's going to be variable. Again, it's not going to be static. You can always predict it's going to happen. And the bigger the disruption is, right, the more major the initiative or the change, the greater resistance will be encountered. And that's just something that we know. We can't avoid it. So I think that's really critical to remember. And we can't eliminate it. So managing it is the way to go, right? We anticipate it. We know it's going to happen, so we manage it. And resistance is not always bad. It's actually on a technology change project. It's usually it happens when the rubber hits the road, right? So the first time people are seeing the new technology, maybe during testing, and people get to see the product for the first time, that really is where much of the resistance happens. But we can really use that resistance to gather feedback and inform the next version of the product or the technology and make sure that we're taking into account what everyone is saying. If we think back to the miner story I told, if there had just been someone to go out and ask them if this was something that they wanted and this was the way they wanted direct deposit to work, would have been able to gather the feedback earlier and not lose the revenue from the strike that the miners went on for about a week whenever they found out about the direct deposit tool. So that resistance can be harnessed as a way to make sure that people are able to provide feedback and feel heard. And if you think of resistance usually happening with the folks who are steady and consistent at that point in a project, they're the ones that we want to have the early testing with. That was one of the ways that they were able to provide value. So thinking about that. It's really important not to take resistance personally. It's really critical to identify it, so call it out, be aware of it, and then you can manage it. You can communicate about it. You can get people involved. And then what it ultimately does is allows us to not have to redo something. So if you try and ignore it or avoid resistance, oftentimes it comes back, right? Someone doesn't use the database and they've got a couple spreadsheets on the side. And that ultimately will result in having to redo work. And that takes time and effort. There are 2 tools I'm going to share with you that you can take away after today and use for yourself, for your projects, to help manage resistance. And it might be for those of you in the messy middle, there's one that might work better, and then there's one for those of you kind of at the front end of a project that you can use as well. The first one is a stakeholder map. And essentially what it allows you to do is to identify what areas of greatest resistance a certain group might have that you're working with. So let's say most of you said you have a major project spanning maybe multiple departments. So you might have volunteer management, major gift officers or fundraisers, you've got database administrators, IT, and then you've got executive directors or leadership. The map is meant to work this way. So the arrows on the left, or you can, group your stakeholders any which way and make sure that you've got them identified. And then on the right-hand side, you are kind of with a broad brush indicating where their resistance might come in. So with volunteer management, as you can see, their resistance might come from, well, this is going to make my volunteers frustrated. So I need to represent for them in my interactions with how this technology is going to work, right? So when I'm informing you about how the technology needs to be, I'm going to be thinking about my volunteers. What this allows you to do is to think about proactively the questions that might come up or pivotal areas where you may want to involve team members from these stakeholder groups in decisions or testing in order to provide early input so that you are not hitting resistance when you get further down the road into the project. And then the other tool is a failure map. So this is a tool that you can use at any point in a project. It can be at the front end of a project. It can be in the very messy middle if something is happening and you need to react to it. Or it can be used as a lessons learned tool. Essentially what you're doing, and this one in particular shows a standard implementation project for new systems or technology. So across the top in the boxes, you see the different kind of stages of the project. You've got your planning portion, then you're working on designing the system, then you're building it out, launching, and then you've got a period where you're stabilizing, right? What you do is sit down and think, okay, for what is the worst possible things that could happen at every point along the way? What are the failure points for each stage in my project? What might happen? And then once you've got those listed out, you take a look at them and you cross out the ones that are out of your control. Because some of them we can't do anything about. So for instance, you can't do anything about the volunteer that might never sign up for an email address, right? They're just never going to have an email address. You can't control that. That is outside of the control, so we're not going to work on that. Once you've got those identified, you can work on your own or with your team to inform how you would mitigate what is going on, how you would address what comes up if it does come up. So in this example, you can see during planning, what is the worst thing that could happen at the planning point of a project is that, in this example, we left someone out. We did not involve the right people. How do you mitigate that and make sure it doesn't happen? How do you address it? You identify your stakeholders and get your department heads to make sure the right people are in the room for the conversation. This is a tool, again, that you can use proactively, right? So for this one, you can do it at the front end of a project during planning. It's also a really useful tool if you've got a team or a group of stakeholders that are consistently showing resistance. We've seen it used, you can sit down with a team and have a workshop session to do this together. And a lot of times what we've found is that folks just need to talk through the strategies to address some of these failure points, some of the areas where they have the most anxiety. Once they talk through it and recognize if it is the worst thing that happens, we have a plan that we've agreed on. It really alleviates resistance further along the road. That's how it's been used. And then again, you can use it kind of once you've launched, you can take a look at what happened during the project and what lessons were learned to address similar types of initiatives going forward into the future. These two tools are ones that I actually use professionally in my work, but I have also done the failure mapping one for large initiatives or personal life changes that I've taken as well. So things you can use for yourself no matter what. And I think, are there a couple of hands raised anywhere? Does anyone have questions at this point? We're almost.
I think we had one question come in, Raleigh, about getting resistance from the CEO and how to kind of navigate that, if that's where the resistance point is for them.
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. And with leadership, it can certainly be a pivotal point. I would say one of the things that we've seen work really well is to ensure that you've got sponsors from across the initiative. So if you've got multiple departments involved, you can have a co-sponsorship model that provides some support in order to build a case for the initiative. And then I would encourage using, if you're in the messy middle, maybe failure mapping, maybe not a full workshop with your CEO or executive director if they're pressed for time or don't want to engage in a full workshop, but it may be an opportunity to take a look at and try and anticipate some of the types of questions they may have and work on addressing some of that resistance together. And I think the common thread there, as you can see, is that one-on-one communication and doing some really active listening to understand what the root cause of some of those anxieties are so that you can follow through and complete some of that failure mapping. So to wrap up here, I just wanted to end with a little bit of maybe lightheartedness. Many of you are in the messy middle, and so you may be feeling the impact of this, but when we take on any initiative and we ask who's ready for change, even your steady consistents or your risk neutrals, not just your change adventurers, will probably raise their hand. It theoretically sounds like an okay idea, if not a great one, right? But as you start to get into it and you start to indicate that things will be changing day to day, or that people will be impacted, and it will take effort for every individual to be a part of this change. Maybe you get some flies buzzing around. It's a little quiet. There's crickets. And so I'm hoping that some of the tools that I gave you today will help you to identify yourself and your role in change at your organizational level, right, where you fall into it, as well as how you as an individual participate in change initiatives, which may or may not be technology related, and how you can bring value to each of those initiatives, and how you can work with your peers and your colleagues to make sure that everyone is along for the ride, and understand the value that they bring. You've got some tools in your back pocket. As Hannah mentioned, we'll be sharing the slide deck so you can have that as a reference point. And we've got a guide that we have up on our website that you can take a look at, or you can reach out to us. My email is also in the slide deck here if you do have any questions that you can't quite formulate today, or that you want to reach out separately to talk about. That is everything I had for today. Thank you all for participating. Are there any questions that anyone has? We've got a couple of minutes left, so I would be happy to answer them.
I'm just going to jump in here to Raleigh. Thank you so much for all of that incredibly insightful information that I'm sure everyone could go back to their desks, to their homes with, and mull over and really implement into their day-to-day to help them be the best they can be, help them be help their organization be the best they can be. And just to echo your sentiment, we're going to open it up for questions for the last few minutes we have here. So if you haven't already, go ahead and use that chat box and type any question in that you might have for Raleigh. And while we wait, I encourage everyone to make note of the contact information and the information and resources that she's made available up on the slides here. And like she said, the slides and the recording will both be made available to you within the next day or so. So if in case you want to circle back, revisit some information, you will have the ability to do that. And let's see if we have any questions here. I know we're reaching the top of the hour, but and Raleigh, do you have your personal contact information in case? Oh, it's right there, Raleigh@teamheller.com. Fantastic. Awesome. Lots of praise from people. Oh, here's a question from Gary. Since technology changes daily, what if we make the change but do not take into the financial plan upgrades as time moves forward?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Gary, for bringing that up. That's definitely a piece of the puzzle that can, that's on the project management side from the budget scope timeline component of it. But then there is a piece of it where if you're already in the messy middle, it'll be an even bigger change, and usually one that is involving leadership to kind of go in and take a look at that. I would say the earlier it can be identified, the better. That's what we've seen be successful. And the other thing I'll say from my experience with CRM ecosystems and technology is that there is always an ongoing cost with a lot of these tools and the direction that the sector is moving with CRM. So taking it into account is absolutely critical. I'd be happy to, if you have more specific questions. This kind of seems like one we can dive into. I would encourage you to reach out if you have more specific situation you want to talk about.
And it looks like we also got a question in from Annie asking, how should you proceed when your executive director consistently gives you the response of not enough time, not enough people, not enough money?
Yeah, that one is also one that we hear on a regular basis. And that's another one where, and Annie, I'm going to make an assumption, but you correct me if I'm wrong, that you might be in the messy middle and that's happening. Again, really important to understand where the root of that is, right? Presumably your ED or this particular fictional executive director has the information to be able to inform that. But having a conversation about it and creating a framework where you can have a conversation about it is going to be really critical, right? Resistance is something we need to be able to manage, and we can't avoid it. And one of those resistance areas may be related to that. again, if open to it, I would encourage you all to work on addressing and coming up with mitigation strategies together, right? What is something that you can maybe roll out in a future phase instead of all at once, right? To think about saving on resources that way in the near term.
Well, as we approach the top of the hour here, I want to thank Raleigh once again for taking the time out of her day to present us with such awesome information, and to extend the invitation to all of you to join us next week. We have a full lineup next week, starting on Tuesday with Steve Grimes, talking about donor motivations using academic research. Wednesday will be Amanda Jarman and gender inclusive data management. And Tim Sarantonio on Thursday will be talking donor journey do's and don'ts. So once again, thank you guys so much for spending time with us today. And we certainly hope that if it's raining where you are, it clears up. If you're enjoying some sunshine, we hope it stays that way for you. And I hope that you guys come back and next week spend some time with us. But until then, I hope you all take care, and we will talk to you then.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.